The bitter winter wind whipped across Karen's face as she stomped down the sidewalk, her eyes narrowed into slits. She couldn't believe what had just happened. That stupid snowman had the audacity to look at her weird. How dare it? As she replayed the incident in her mind, Karen's fury only grew. She had been minding her own business, strutting down the street like she owned it, when she noticed the snowman standing in someone's front yard. Its coal eyes seemed to follow her every move, an almost mocking expression on its carrot nose. "What are you looking at?" Karen had snapped, glaring at the inanimate object. But the snowman just continued to stare, unmoving and unperturbed. That was the last straw. Without a second thought, Karen had reared back and punched the snowman square in its smug, frozen face. The impact sent chunks of snow and ice flying in all directions, splattering the pristine white landscape. Karen stood there, chest heaving, adrenaline coursing through her veins. A sense of twisted satisfaction washed over her as she surveyed the damage. That'll teach that arrogant snowman to look at her like that. As Karen turned to continue on her way, she noticed a group of neighborhood kids staring at her, their mouths agape. "What are you looking at?" she snarled, daring them to say something. The children quickly averted their gaze and scurried away, clearly intimidated by her outburst. Feeling vindicated, Karen marched home, replaying the scene over and over in her mind. She had shown that snowman who was boss, and she couldn't wait to tell her friends all about it. They would surely understand and applaud her for standing up for herself. But as Karen unlocked her front door and stepped inside, a nagging feeling of unease began to creep in. What if someone had seen her attack the snowman? Would there be consequences? Her brow furrowed as she contemplated the possibility. Just then, the sound of the doorbell pierced the silence, making Karen jump. Cautiously, she peered through the peephole, her heart pounding. There, on her doorstep, stood a uniformed police officer, his expression stern. Karen's stomach dropped. It seemed her moment of impulsive rage was about to catch up with her. With a deep breath, Karen opened the door, plastering a fake smile on her face. "Good evening, officer. How can I help you?" The police officer's brow was furrowed as he spoke. "Ma'am, we've received a report of vandalism in the neighborhood. A witness claims they saw you attack a snowman in a front yard not far from here. Is this true?" Karen's heart raced, her mind scrambling to come up with a plausible excuse. "Vandalism? Oh my, that's simply dreadful. I can assure you I had nothing to do with that." She tried to sound as innocent and concerned as possible. The officer regarded her skeptically. "The witness said you punched the snowman, sending snow and ice flying everywhere." They were quite shaken by the incident. Trapped, Karen's facade began to crumble. "Well, I mean, that snowman was," she stammered, desperately searching for a way to justify her actions. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come down to the station and make a statement," the officer interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Karen's mind raced, her palms growing sweaty. This couldn't be happening. She had only been standing up for herself, putting that arrogant snowman in its place. How could she be in trouble for that? Reluctantly, she stepped outside, locking the door behind her. As the officer led her to his patrol car, a growing sense of dread filled Karen. She had never been in trouble with the law before, and the prospect of having a criminal record terrified her. Once they arrived at the police station, Karen was ushered into a small, sterile-looking room. She fidgeted nervously as the officer questioned her, pressing for details about the incident. Try as she might, Karen couldn't find a way to justify her actions without sounding completely unhinged. As the interrogation wore on, Karen's bravado slowly crumbled. She realized that her impulsive decision to punch the snowman had serious consequences, and she was about to face the music. The realization dawned on her that her entitled behavior had finally caught up with her, and she had no one to blame but herself. After hours of questioning, Karen was finally allowed to leave the police station, her hands trembling and her mind racing. She couldn't believe the turn of events. All because she had the audacity to punch a harmless snowman. As she made her way home, Karen tried to push the incident out of her mind, but the weight of her actions kept creeping back. She had always prided herself on her sense of entitlement and her willingness to stand up for herself, but this time, her impulsive behavior had gone too far. When Karen finally arrived home, she was greeted by a flurry of missed calls and text messages from her friends. Word had clearly spread quickly about her run-in with the law. Karen, what happened?" One friend exclaimed. "I heard you got arrested for punching a snowman. Is that true?" Wincing, Karen reluctantly recounted the story, downplaying her role and trying to make it sound like a misunderstanding. But her friends were having none of it. "Seriously, Karen? You attacked a snowman because it looked at you weird?" Another friend scoffed. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." Karen felt her face flush with embarrassment. She had always relied on her friends to back her up, no matter what, but now they were turning on her. "You guys just don't understand," she protested, her voice tinged with desperation. That snowman was being so rude and disrespectful. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Her friends were appalled by her behavior and refused to make excuses for her. One by one, they expressed their disappointment, leaving Karen feeling increasingly isolated and alone. As the reality of the situation sank in, Karen's sense of entitlement began to crumble. She had always assumed that she could do whatever she wanted without consequence, but the police interrogation and her friends' reactions had shaken her to the core. Collapsing onto her couch, Karen buried her face in her hands, a wave of shame and regret washing over her. She had never felt so powerless and vulnerable, and the realization that her actions had real consequences was a harsh wake-up call. The next morning, Karen awoke with a pounding headache, the events of the previous day weighing heavily on her mind. She had barely slept, tossing and turning, as she replayed the scene over and over in her head. As she slowly got ready for the day, Karen couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of her stomach. She knew she would have to face the consequences of her actions, and the prospect terrified her. Reluctantly, Karen made her way to the police station, her hands trembling as she pushed open the door. The officer at the front desk regarded her with a stern expression. "I'm here to follow up on the incident from yesterday," Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. The officer nodded and gestured for her to have a seat. "The detective will be with you shortly." As Karen waited, her mind raced with possibilities. Would she be charged with a crime? Would she have to pay a fine? The uncertainty was almost unbearable. Finally, the detective emerged from his office, a thick file in his hand. "Miss Karen, please come with me," he said, his tone neutral. Karen followed the detective into a small windowless room, her heart pounding in her chest. She sat down across from him, her palms sweating. "Miss Karen, I'll be honest with you," the detective began, his gaze unwavering. "The incident you were involved in yesterday is a serious matter. Assaulting a snowman, even if it's not a living being, is considered a form of vandalism." Karen swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. I didn't mean to cause any trouble," she stammered, her voice trembling. The detective raised a hand, silencing her. "I understand that you may not have realized the gravity of your actions, but the fact remains that you deliberately damaged someone else's property." Karen felt a lump in her throat as the detective continued. "After reviewing the evidence and considering the witness statements, we've decided to charge you with criminal mischief. You'll need to appear in court to answer for this offense." The words hit Karen like a punch to the gut. Criminal mischief. A court appearance. This was far worse than she had imagined. Her mind raced, desperately searching for a way to escape the consequences of her actions. But I'm not a criminal," she protested, her voice rising in desperation. "I was just standing up for myself. That snowman was being so disrespectful." The detective shook his head, unswayed by her pleas. "I'm sorry, Miss Karen, but the law doesn't make exceptions for that kind of behavior. You'll need to face the consequences of your actions." As the gravity of the situation sank in, Karen felt her world crumbling around her. She had always believed that her sense of entitlement would protect her, but now it had betrayed her, leading her down a path she never could have imagined. The days leading up to Karen's court appearance were a blur of anxiety and uncertainty. She had never faced legal consequences before, and the prospect of a criminal record filled her with dread. Desperate to avoid the impending doom, Karen reached out to her family, pleading for help. But to her dismay, they were equally appalled by her behavior and refused to intervene. "Karen, you can't just go around punching Snowman because they look at you weird," her mother scolded over the phone. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." Tears of frustration welled in Karen's eyes as she listened to her mother's lecture. "But Mom, you don't understand," she cried. "That Snowman was being so disrespectful. I had to do something." Her mother sighed heavily. "That's no excuse, Karen. You need to take responsibility for your actions. I can't help you get out of this mess." Feeling utterly alone, Karen turned to her friends once more, desperate for their support. But to her disappointment, they too had abandoned her, unwilling to defend her questionable behavior. "Sorry, Karen, but we just can't justify what you did," one of her closest friends said, her voice laced with disappointment. "Punching a snowman? That's just crazy, even for you." The realization that she had no one in her corner hit Karen like a ton of bricks. She had always taken her friends and family for granted, assuming they would stand by her no matter what. But now, when she needed them the most, they had all turned their backs on her. As the court date drew closer, Karen's anxiety only intensified. She spent countless hours rehearsing her defense, desperately searching for a way to minimize the consequences of her actions. But deep down, she knew that there was no easy way out of this predicament. The day of the trial, Karen entered the courtroom with trembling steps, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the judge and the spectators boring into her, judging her every move. When her turn came to speak, Karen's voice quivered as she tried to explain her side of the story. But her pleas for leniency fell on deaf ears. The judge, unimpressed by her excuses, handed down a sentence that left Karen reeling. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, Karen felt a profound sense of shame and defeat. She had never imagined that her sense of entitlement and impulsive behavior could lead her to this point. But now, she had no choice but to face the consequences of her actions, no matter how painful they might be. The sentence the judge handed down left Karen reeling: a hefty fine and 50 hours of community service. As she walked out of the courthouse, the reality of her situation finally sank in. She, Karen, the queen of entitlement, had been brought down by her own impulsive actions. Feeling utterly humiliated, Karen retreated to the safety of her home, shutting out the world. She spent the next few days in a state of self-pity, wallowing in her misery and lamenting the unfairness of it all. But as the initial shock wore off, a new emotion began to take hold: anger. How dare the judge punish her for standing up for herself? Didn't they understand that the Snowman had looked at her weird? In Karen's mind, she was the true victim here, not the inanimate object of her rage. Fueled by her resentment, Karen decided to take action. She would appeal the sentence, she told herself, determined to prove her innocence and clear her name. Surely, the higher courts would see the injustice of her punishment and overturn the ruling. With renewed determination, Karen set about gathering her evidence and preparing her case. She scoured the internet for legal precedents, convinced that she would find a loophole that would set her free. And when that didn't work, she began to harass the court system, bombarding them with phone calls and emails, demanding a retrial. But as the days turned into weeks, Karen's efforts proved fruitless. The more she fought, the more obstinate the authorities became. They refused to budge, unmoved by her pleas and threats. It was then that Karen realized the true depth of her predicament. She was in over her head, and there was no way out. Defeated, Karen finally conceded and began to serve her community service sentence. It was a humbling experience, forcing her to interact with people she would have normally looked down upon. And as she toiled away, picking up litter and helping at the local soup kitchen, something within her started to shift. She began to see the world through a different lens, one that wasn't solely focused on her own needs and desires. The more she interacted with those less fortunate, the more she realized the true cost of her entitled behavior. And for the first time in her life, Karen felt a twinge of genuine remorse for her actions. As Karen continued to serve her community service sentence, she found herself increasingly drawn to the people she was helping. The homeless men and women she served meals to, the elderly she assisted with yard work, and the children she tutored. They all seemed to possess a resilience and strength that Karen had never experienced in her own life. Slowly, the walls of Karen's entitled, self-absorbed mindset began to crumble. She found herself listening more, speaking less, and gradually shedding the armor of arrogance that had once defined her. The more she interacted with those she had once deemed beneath her, the more she realized just how much she had been missing. One day, as Karen was stacking canned goods at the local food bank, a young mother approached her, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for your help," the woman said softly. "I don't know what I'd do without this place. It's been a real lifesaver for my family." Karen felt a lump form in her throat as she looked into the woman's weary face. I'm the one who should be thanking you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're teaching me more than I could ever teach you." The woman's brow furrowed, but she simply smiled and nodded, turning to continue her own task. Karen stood there, transfixed, a profound realization dawning on her. This was what it meant to truly help others, to put their needs before her own. And in that moment, she knew that her life would never be the same. As the weeks passed, Karen's perspective continued to shift. She found herself becoming more patient, more compassionate, and more in tune with the struggles of those around her. And with each act of service, she could feel a piece of her old self slipping away, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and humility. The day she completed her community service sentence, Karen felt a bittersweet mixture of emotions. On one hand, she was relieved to be free of the court-mandated obligations, but on the other, she found herself reluctant to leave the world she had come to know and appreciate. Standing on the steps of the courthouse, Karen took a deep breath and contemplated her next move. She knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in her life, she felt a glimmer of hope and a desire to make a real difference. The entitled, self-centered Karen was gone, and in her place stood a woman who was eager to learn, grow, and embraced a new way of living. In the months that followed, Karen's transformation continued to unfold in unexpected ways. The community service she had once dreaded had become a source of fulfillment and purpose, and she found herself drawn to the work of local nonprofit organizations. One day, as Karen was volunteering at a soup kitchen, she noticed a familiar face among the patrons. It was the young mother she had met during her food bank shift. The woman's eyes widened in recognition, and a hesitant smile crossed her lips. "I remember you," she said. "You were the one who helped me that day." Karen nodded, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Yes, that was me. I'm glad to see you again." The woman's expression softened, and she gestured to the empty seat beside her. "Would you like to join me?" Karen didn't hesitate, sliding into the chair and engaging the woman in conversation. Over the course of their meal, Karen learned about the woman's struggles, a recent job loss, mounting medical bills, and the constant fear of not being able to provide for her family. As the woman spoke, Karen listened intently, her heart aching for the hardships she was facing. Gone were the days when she would have simply brushed off such concerns, dismissing them as problems of the less fortunate. Now, Karen found herself empathizing deeply, her own past sense of entitlement fading into the background. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine concern. The woman's eyes widened, and for a moment, she seemed at a loss for words. I don't know what to say, she stammered. No one has ever asked me that before. Karen reached out and gently squeezed the woman's hand. Well, I'm asking now. Please, let me know how I can make your life a little bit easier. In that moment, a profound shift occurred within Karen. The once self-absorbed, entitled woman had been replaced by someone who was genuinely, selflessly invested in the well-being of others. It was a transformation that had been forged through the crucible of her own mistakes, and it had left her forever changed. As the woman began to share her needs, Karen listened intently, taking mental notes and vowing to do whatever she could to help. And in that simple act of compassion, Karen found a sense of fulfillment that had eluded her for so long. From that day forward, Karen's life took on a new purpose. She continued to volunteer, to donate, and to advocate for those in need, driven by a deep desire to make amends for her past transgressions. And with each passing day, she felt a little bit lighter, a little bit freer, and a little bit more at peace with the person she had become.